This classic study in exopolitics, the notoriously controversial saga of a Swiss farmer's claimed encounter with beings from the Pleiades star system, was the initial inspiration for my involvement with UFO research. In 1980, I had the fortuitous opportunity to meet Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, who was fully involved in the Billy Meier investigation at that time.
One of the most convincing UFO cases of all time began in January 1975 in Switzerland. The experience began as a UFO abduction case. A Swiss farmer was taken aboard a spacecraft, articulated words with the occupants, and began an exchange of information that has continued on and is going on today, still going on today. The spacecraft flew out of the blue and landed. The occupant got out and stood in the grass and sat on the grass and talked to the man, and they had an exchange that lasted 20 minutes, and there have been 116 contacts since then. Case involved a Mr. Billy Meier. In response to his question, they said that they come from the Pleiades. They said that they are here observing humanity, that they have information, some of the information is of a scientific nature, and that he would be asked to pass it to other people. They say that they are not gods, they're not superior people, they are men just like we are men. And he's taken hundreds of photographs of the Pleiadian spacecraft operating in Swiss airspace. And this has all been checked by the computer. The computer says that this object is on the order of 20 feet in diameter and about 120 yards away. It agrees with what the witness said about the diameter. He says it's 7 meters in diameter, it's about 21 feet. He took messages, he copied notes from the Pleiadians, wrote them down, over 2,000 pages worth. Here's a book of 600 pages that I have translated into English so far, and this represents 1/4 of the notes. We have no case on record with that volume of information delivered by extraterrestrial contacts to a contactee, a UFO contactee. And the information in there is just staggering, just phenomenal. The information covers technical and scientific data as best they can explain it to us in terms of the words that we use in our technology. It gets into spiritual problems, spiritual development of man and our relationship to deity. It describes other existences in space, other human beings living in other planetary environments.
This film was made when I first met Wendell, and you can see his excitement and enthusiasm for this case were genuine and infectious. Wendell was a meticulous researcher, and based on the wealth of evidence gleaned from Meier and multiple witnesses, it appeared that he was on top of the most authentic UFO contact case of all time. Definitive proof of an extraterrestrial reality. So of course I was more than delighted to offer my skills as an artist to illustrate the Meier UFO experience. Beginning in 1975, a Swiss farmer named Edward Billy Meier gained global notoriety by claiming that alien visitors deliberately posed their spaceships for him to photograph. As well, he reported multiple contacts with human-looking UFO pilots who told him they came from the Pleiades star system, 500 light-years from Earth. According to Meier, these Pleiadian cosmonauts chose not to reveal themselves on a grand public scale, but instead, their discreet Switzerland visit was merely to demonstrate to Meier himself that humans of Earth are not the only rational thinking beings alive in the universe. Meier's tale of a captivating girl named Semyasi, visiting from outer space, bore all the idyllic charm of James Hilton's book Lost Horizon. Only in this case, rather than a utopian culture hidden in the lofty Himalayas, an extraterrestrial Shangri-La exists in the distant stars of the Pleiades. And yet, despite this story's innocent appeal, it has sparked an international firestorm of swirling controversy. Along with his claim of extraterrestrial contact, Meier shared a collection of the most spectacular UFO photographs ever produced, along with the claim that the Pleiadians actually posed their ships for him to capture on film. Pictures this good could only be hoaxed. After this story hit the newswires, a team of American investigators led by retired Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens flew to Switzerland to examine Meier's story firsthand. Based on the sheer volume of evidence gathered by Wendell and his research team, including multiple eyewitness testimonies, metal samples, sound recordings, and photographic analysis, it appeared that the most definitive extraterrestrial contact case in human history was at hand. The implications were staggering. But was this story welcomed by the world in a spectacular news media event? No. The reaction was just the opposite. In many instances, the story was met with fanatic hostility. Despite all the compelling evidence to support Meier's claims, a determined campaign to effectively reduce this case to a non-event seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Meier was ultimately dismissed as the most elaborate UFO hoaxer of all time, a tainted reputation that dumped his grand tale into the anecdotal dustbin of urban legends, further discrediting the whole UFO issue as absurd crackpot nonsense. However, authentic or not, the social reactions precipitated by the Meier controversy are a goldmine of exopolitical study, bringing into sharp focus the question of our contemporary human society's actual readiness to deal with an extraterrestrial reality. To this day, the Billy Meier UFO case remains one of the world's most controversial and perplexing UFO mysteries. Was Edward Billy Meier actually visited by extraterrestrials? Or did this one-armed night watchman, living on a government pension, riding the Swiss countryside on a tiny moped, stage the greatest UFO hoax of all time? This tale has virtually polarized the UFO research community. Its supporters are as passionate as its debunkers, and yet to this day neither side has provided a definitive verdict to this enigma, one way or the other. But the interminable wrangling continues. The original American investigation was conducted by Lee and Britt Elders and their associate Tom Welch, all experts in industrial counter-espionage. This trio was recruited by Lieutenant Colonel Wendell C. Stevens, a retired United States Air Force combat pilot with 20 years UFO research experience. As well, the team was assisted by Jim Dilatoso, a professional computer expert who served a key role with digital photographic analysis. Totally independent of UFO groups of that day like APRO or MUFON, Stevens organized one of the most comprehensive UFO investigations ever engaged. Conclusions based on this team's research from 1976 to 1982 determined that digital photo examination confirmed that the images tested were in fact of a large object, approximately 20 feet in diameter, photographed at some distance from the camera. Metal samples examined revealed a process of cold fusion metal combination unknown to earthly science at that time. Audio recordings of the UFO sounds examined by professional recording studio experts revealed frequencies that matched no earthly sound and could not be duplicated by recording technologies of that day. So there hangs the tale. These findings, along with an additional 30 eyewitness testimonies, seem to validate at least a portion of this contact story. Meier's claims of meetings, discussions, and travels with visitors from the Pleiades were totally subjective and virtually impossible to independently verify. Stevens' research team realized in 1980 the best they could hope to achieve was to validate the physical evidence at hand, which they did to their satisfaction. More than 3,000 pages of contact notes, transcribed by Billy, remain anecdotal and circumstantial. Short of the Pleiadians publicly landing in their beamships, little else could ultimately prove that Billy's contact claims were true. In 1980, a motion picture detailing the original investigation by Wendell Stevens and his research team, entitled Contact, was scheduled for national theatrical distribution. But a last-minute dispute over copyright issues blocked Contact from public release. However, researcher Gary Kinder retraced the Stevens investigation efforts and verified the film's conclusions, which he published in his book entitled Light Years. It should be noted, however, that the original investigating team did not have sufficient resources to subject all of Meier's pictures to photo analysis, and over time it is fairly evident that Meier further embellished his story with absurdly spurious photographs which ultimately played into the hands of his debunkers and sabotaged his credibility. It is not our intent with this essay to validate Meier's claims. His story will stand or fall on its own merit over the natural course of time. However, the Meier case does serve as yet another sad example of debunked UFO contact cases that ultimately invalidate serious research into the potential reality of extraterrestrial intelligence. In fact, the entire field of ufology is a bewildering labyrinth of false claims, inconclusive evidence, and deliberate disinformation. So vital exopolitical questions remain. What agencies or corporate interests might be served by discrediting legitimate claims of ET contact? What groups have the means and the motives to make claims of interstellar space travel, free energy propulsion, or contact with more advanced ET civilizations sound like ludicrous poppycock? Could it be that the ruling elite of our world don't appreciate extraterrestrial visitors exposing their greedy planet Earth monopoly game? Even Meier's alleged Pleiadian visitors stated, "Without exception, all Earth governments are made up of human beings for which power hunger and an avid thirst for profits are characteristic. They only want, under cover of peace and friendship, to occupy our ray ships, to exercise absolute rule over the Earth." So, does the Billy Meier Enigma contain a kernel of truth, intentionally buried somewhere under layers of controversy and disinformation? The world may never know. If they actually exist, the ultimate truth rests with the Pleiadians themselves. As Meier candidly admitted, his story of ET contact was never intended to be definitive, only provocative, and to this day it remains just that. Thus, to follow along in UFO investigator Wendell Stevens' footsteps, I have steadfastly pursued my own research crusade to ferret out the men and their motives behind the insidious UFO cover-up, and as such I dedicate this production to Wendell's memory.